Today we enter the world of international business, where culture clash poses as big a risk to success as having the wrong product or strategy. What's the secret to negotiating in China? How do you break into the Middle East? And which countries struggle to keep up with our pace of work? Taking questions today is Dr. Rich Griffith, an expert on business psychology at the Florida Institute of Technology in Melbourne. He is spearheading a summit on cross-cultural management next month here in Brevard. Here's what Griffith told me. Rich, thanks so much for joining us here today. In a minute, we're going to talk about this special event that you have coming up. But let's define cross-cultural management a little bit here for our viewers. What is it, and why is it important?
Well, cross-cultural management sort of takes into account the differences in the values that people have and the way they behave in different nations. So we tend to have assumptions about what work means and how we work and who we work with. And those assumptions are different in different parts of the world. You know, a leader in one place, their behaviors would be inappropriate in others. So we try to help organizations that are working internationally understand kind of the new rules of the game as they're going into a country or they're starting to work with a new partner.
So, I mean, if we think in the United States that things are different between maybe New York City and Silicon Valley, imagine going to India or China or the Middle East and trying to do business, or one of them coming here. Correct?
That's a great example. You know, if you were working in New York and all of a sudden you had to do business in the South, you'd have to adjust your strategy a little bit, your expectations a little bit. And the more cultural distance that we have, the more those expectations and assumptions are going to differ.
And so what is your background?
My background is in industrial organizational psychology, which is sort of psychology of the workplace. We try to help people pick the right individuals to get them into the organization, train them up, and try to keep them happy.
All right, well, let's give some examples of how things might be different. I thought one of the things that you once told me was really different, I thought was fascinating, was how negotiations between China and the United States are so different. And if you don't know what you're getting into, you could really wind up on the losing end of a negotiation. Why don't you clue us in?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So your audience is going to be mostly people from the United States, so I'll kind of use that as the comparison. In Chinese negotiation style, there are some distinct phases that are starting to occur. If you're aware of them, you can use them to your advantage. If not, it can be problematic. In the first phase, you've really never seen hospitality like the Chinese will offer.
So I'm going over to China, and I've got a product, or I represent some company. I want to make some inroads and get started over there.
Yeah, so you probably have tied into someone's network, and they're sort of helping you, sponsoring you, if you will, to meet some people. And they're going to take you out to dinner, and you're going to have the best food you've ever had, and wonderful wine, and they're going to show you around the town, and you think this is really going well. So you're excited because we would sort of celebrate a negotiation at the United States by doing some of those things. The Chinese do it right up front. And then there'll be a period of time where they really go silent. And they're doing their homework on you. And they're learning about not only what you do, but about your networks.
So you've come back to the United States, and you're thinking, I'm back here in Brevard County. Boy, that went well. I can't wait to cinch this deal. And all of a sudden, crickets.
Absolutely. And you've probably told your boss that you've done really well. So now you've got pressure on you to close this deal, because in his head, he's already put this one on the books. And you may not get answers to your calls or to your emails, and all of a sudden you have no information. And as it's more and more quiet, you're giving more and more clues about what you're looking for in your communications.
So you're reaching out to whoever your contacts were over there by email, saying, okay, you know, you want to get some information. Maybe you're offering some little sweeteners along the way. Maybe could I get you interested in this? Maybe you'd be more interested if I did that for you. You know, we can also do this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you're starting to tell them what's important to you and why you want to close this deal, and you're giving them levers for negotiation. So once the Chinese partners have figured out their game, they're going to rapidly close, and they're going to put a deal on the table, and they'll try to get you to commit to it right away, and then they'll start changing the deal. So they'll just look for little things because you're committed now. You're all in, and they'll look for small advantages that they can pull back out to try to make you desperate.
Okay, so what happened to the people that were taking you on the town and showing you the best, wining and dining you and taking you to the best golf resorts and all that kind of stuff?
Well, now all of a sudden the tone is a little different, and it can be a little bit more aggressive and sort of aggressive use of humor, which is really interesting. So the tone, that's another thing that catches people off guard. You were looking for this very friendly tone, and it's a tougher close to the negotiation.
Wow, so they could really, you've given them all the information. You haven't gained much in the process, and they've been backgrounding you to see whether you are somebody, so what should somebody from the United States think about or do when confronted by this kind of scenario?
Well, first remember that you got to play the long game in a Chinese negotiation. They're very oriented towards the long term. They're very oriented towards long partnerships. So we tend to be thinking about quick profit. That's definitely not the way the Chinese are working. So their goals are different. You have to realize that the negotiation is going to take much, much longer to be able to conclude. We just closed a negotiation with the Chinese university that took us 3 years from the time that we initiated discussions.
Wow.
So the patience, especially in that middle phase, is going to be very important. Understanding that the rapid pace of the end will be very different than the beginning, and being prepared that they might pull people in and out of the room. You're not quite sure who you're negotiating with at some point. So if you're aware of the dynamics, you can kind of plan for them.
Be patient, play poker. I gotcha.
But be genuine. It's
Sure.
you know it's not a game. That's the key to all business interactions. But it's a different you. You're just sort of shading a little left or a little right.
And when you said we, you mean the Institute for Cross-Cultural Management at Florida Tech, your
that's correct.
organization, which helps people do this stuff. Okay, what about, how would things be different if we were going over, say, to the Middle East? Now, I know some people that are hot to get into Dubai, hot to get into the United Arab Emirates, maybe Saudi Arabia, that kind of thing, maybe do some manufacturing over there, or they see a great place to make sales. What do I need to know?
The Middle East is going to be really relationship-oriented, and it's going to take longer to do things. So if you're going over there with the intent to make quick friends, quick sales, which is sort of the American style.
I'm going to give you a quota. You go in, make some cold calls, and let's get some money.
Yeah, that would be that'd be the worst approach that you could take in the Middle East, because first of all, their networks are so good that they probably know all about your product and your company already. They've reached out to their friends. And the word friend means something different there than it does here. So the friendships are deeper and they take longer to develop. So if you were going to go over and you're going to try to start some business initiative there, you have to be prepared to take some losses in the beginning, where you're really taking people out to dinner, you're meeting with their family, you're walking around the street, and your cohort may take you by the hand, which could throw people off. So there's a patience that's going to be required to build those networks. Once you build those networks and you're in the in group, you're considered a friend. You can sell anything, anytime, and no one will even ask you what it costs. But what they want to do is business with people they can trust.
Why do you suppose that is? Does it just go back to their centuries of kind of tribal customs, and if you're doing business with somebody that you don't know, it could kill you, kind of a situation?
That's true. I mean, so culture comes from somewhere. We're finding some of it is biological in basis, but a lot of it comes from the region that someone was in. How did they have to work? What did they eat? And in situations where it was risky, where you are small groups and you need to band together to be able to survive, those values become deeply ingrained. And then as the world has modernized and it's not so dangerous anymore, those values are still there. And people don't see them. It's the analogy we often use, it's like being a fish in water. You don't know you're in water. You don't realize the waterness until you're out all of a sudden, and culture is often like that.
Interesting. One of the things that I hear from people who try to do business in Latin America is, what does it mean to be on time? If I've got an appointment at a certain time, what do I do? Because sometimes people just don't seem to show up when Americans think they're going to show up. Fill us in a little bit here. What should we know about?
Yeah, that's great. That's one of the big differences that you notice right off the bat is what does time mean? And what is late in a culture? In the United States, time is money. We think of it as a commodity. You can waste time just like you would waste a resource. And in other parts of the world, it's not viewed that way. It's not viewed as linear. It can be viewed almost in a cyclical fashion. That why does the sun come up in the morning? An American will use a scientific explanation. Why does the sun come up in China? Because it came up yesterday, and it will come up tomorrow. So you're not thinking about time as a commodity. It's eternal in some ways. The lateness issue is really funny, though. In some cultures, let's say we have a 2 o'clock meeting. When is late? About 10 to 2. When I was in Poland, it was amazing how punctual the Polish were. And every minute of the day was on an itinerary that they kept to very, very well.
Really?
In some places in the world, if you had to meet at 2 o'clock, when would we meet? 4 o'clock. And when I was in Spain, people routinely were 2 hours late to meetings. It wouldn't be an issue. But they're going to be late to their next meeting too. So the thing comes back to relationships again. So I'm going to spend time with you because you're my friend. And just because the clock says I've got to go somewhere, the clock is not my friend.
What's more important,
You're
the
my
clock
friend.
or my relationships, right? Interesting. Yeah, well, I guess if you are in a nation that takes siestas, you probably better be used to doing business at 9 p.m. too, right?
That's true. Very late into the evening. So another thing people have to get used to is somebody's going to be inconvenienced when you're working internationally. So just getting a meeting set up can be really difficult. When we're working with people from 3, 4 different countries and you try to get a meeting together, there's like one optimal time, and even then, somebody's going to be inconvenienced and lose some sleep.
So you probably, if you're going to, set up your calendar, you got your iPhone or your iPad and you're, setting up your calendar for a meeting in some of these parts of the world, you probably better not overbook, right? Because you're going to spend a lot of that time waiting and missing things.
Yeah,
Make time for the person that matters.
That's true. Anytime you're doing business internationally, I think you can expect it to take at least 30% longer than it would take in the United States, and it's always going to be more expensive. So what we try to do is we can't make that 30% go away, but if we can help you get better by 10%, if you drop it down to 20% longer or 20% more expensive, for some companies, 20% or a 10% increase in effectiveness could be billions of dollars.
Wow. Okay, so we've been talking about mistakes or culture clashes for Americans when they go to places overseas, but part of what you do is help countries from other parts of the world and businesses from other parts of the world come into the United States and succeed here. What are some of their impressions of Americans? I mean, what would somebody from, say, Europe or China need to know about how you do business here? And what are some of their impressions of us?
I can think of a couple companies that we've worked with recently. There was a Japanese company that had acquired a tech firm here in town, and they wanted to be able to get their management speaking well. And the biggest issue that we saw coming out of that was the difference in American decision-making style and Japanese decision-making style. So Japanese decision-making is much slower. There are going to be more people that are consulted. The decision is going to work its way through lots of individual discussions, but then when they're ready to implement, it goes now, because all the decision-making has been done.
They've built consensus.
Absolutely. And in the United States, we kind of make a decision pretty quick, and then we modify it on the fly. So we like to get moving, and then we adapt to the context of what's happening. We wing it.
We do it in a judicial way.
Yeah.
You make your case, you make your case, the boss rules, we'll launch, and then when we find the bugs in the app, we'll send people a notification that we're going to update their app.
Absolutely. Yeah, that characterizes it pretty well.
What else? We talked about relationships. And I think my relationships here are pretty good, but if I went over to another country, they clearly have a different view of what a relationship is and what a friend is. What do they think of us?
Well, in the work context, Americans are really task-oriented. So if you think about what a business meeting is like, we usually have about 5 minutes of small talk in the beginning, and then someone calls the meeting to order, and we get right to work. If you were going to be doing work, let's say in Latin America, you would never do that. You would really need to sit down for a while, you're going to have coffee, and that first meeting you might not even talk about work. Sooner or later you'll get around to it, and the work gets done. It's amazing that these differences that we see that are so drastic, that anything gets done. But they're quite adept at business practices because they can trust the person, then they can move quicker once they move along.
Oh, I see. So they're investing at the front end a little bit more in the relationship, getting on the same wavelength and socially, and that makes things go faster and more efficient when they need to be making decisions down the road.
Yeah, that's true. So Americans, you have to watch generalizing, because you can't just say Americans do this or Brazilians do that. There's a wide range of things that are going on, but typically Americans have more shallow business relationships. It's about the money. So if you can make me money, then we might have a deal that's going on, and I might not need that initial level of trust. If the data says it's right, then we may move on the data. And that may not be the same in the rest of the world, where a friend is really a friend. You know the names of their children, you know their birth dates, you know their grandmother, you've probably eaten with the extended family, you may vacation together. And then when you're doing business with someone like that, the trust is implicit and we can move quicker.
Wow. Wow. Well, so who am I allowed to talk to? When I go to another country, do I just look up another salesperson? Do I go right to the CEO? Do I go to the front line person and plant a seed. There has to be some kind of things to know about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So in our culture, status isn't as important as it is in other places. I have a PhD, I almost never tell anybody. It doesn't matter to me, it's just letters. And I just go do my job, and everybody around me has one, so it's no big deal. But in some cultures, your status matters more. And if I wanted to talk to someone in a culture that had high power distance, the sort of status consciousness, I'd want to talk to somebody that was my rank. I would want to make sure that they understood my accomplishments. I definitely would use my PhD when I'm traveling abroad because that matters. There's a status to that which makes what I say more important, ultimately more influential. So in some places in the world, you're correct because you're the boss. And that may not be the case here, where we might question someone who will be of a higher status because their technical approach wasn't sound or didn't quite make sense to us. And you would never do that in regions where status mattered.
Do bosses solicit critical feedback in other countries the way some good American companies do?
To some extent, but that's kind of new thinking. You know, getting upward feedback in certain regions in the world would be taboo. And it wouldn't, even if the boss asked for it, it would be so uncomfortable for the employees to give that. So deeply ingrained that you're not to criticize your supervisor, that they would probably just give platitudes or sometimes really very indirect communication that would be hard to pin any specifics down. So the feedback would have less value.
A minute ago you mentioned Japan, and you talked about how the decision making there can be slower, which kind of doesn't fit our stereotype of the Japanese as being so hard working and fast and efficient and all of that. And it begged the question to me, how does our work ethic compare to some other places on earth? I mean, I'm always stunned to hear about people getting 5 weeks off a year in Europe. You know, how do you get anything done that way? I mean, any insights on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Here's a great phenomenon of being inside the fishbowl and not being able to feel culture. I feel guilty for not working harder. There's nights I pull all-nighters because there's work that needs to be done, but I'm thinking about my people, and I never seem to be able to meet this bar that I've set for myself.
Right.
And when I work with people in Europe, particularly in Europe, Southern Europe quite often, their view on work is very different. It's much more balanced. And you start to see our work ethic, it's almost like a mental illness that we have. We feel the need to work so hard. But we're 4 times more productive than you know, any other country in the world. So we get a lot done. We tend to be able to be innovative and be able to push products forward. And a lot of that's just because we'll hustle. And the rest of the world gets their work done too, but they have much more balance. They're more concerned about stress in the workplace and the health of the worker. When you look at my discipline across the world, it tends to be more about the worker than it is about productivity and profit, which is what we tend to look at in the U.S.
Right. Well, in the United States, maybe it has something to do with the fact that we all think that we can be Donald Trump someday, right? But if you're in Europe, no matter how hard you work, you're never going to be the king. You know, you can look at a village where your family has lived for 1,000 years, maybe 500 years, something like that, and you just go, well, you know what, there's only so much I'm realistically going to accomplish, and might as well get the most out of life.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that contribute to that, but that's one. You know, here we have a level playing field. Everybody could grow up to be president, or that's what you're told
Sure.
when you're a young kid. But if you're not born into the right family in some cultures, your status is pretty much locked in, and you have certain expectations for life.
What are some of the countries that have the most focus on personal status? I mean, I hear India has this caste system, but in many ways they seem a lot like us in technology and the way that we communicate and do business together. Is that one of them?
Yeah, there still is a social order in India, although the caste system is no longer in place. People still are aware of their lineage. I'd say this biggest status-conscious culture I've worked with is China. So just arranging a conversation, you have to have the right people in the room, and you have to greet people in a certain order, and you have to know that if you don't have the decision maker in the room, which I'm never likely to have because I'm not the CEO, well then that decision's going to have to go up the ladder, and it's going to have to come back down the ladder. So I see it being more evident in China than in some other places I've been.
So you're doing negotiations on behalf of the university sometimes?
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. What are some of the ways that Florida Tech is doing that?
Well, what we've done is reach out with a variety of people around the world for different reasons. Many times it's research partnerships. So for us to understand how the world is working, we need to be able to understand that from their perspective.
I see.
Most of the research in my field was conducted in the United States and in Western Europe. So now reaching around to partners in Norway, in Poland, Germany, in Spain, and in China, and now in Ethiopia. We just signed an agreement so that we can conduct joint research to better understand how the world is working.
Wow, really? Ethiopia?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, I'm learning more about Ethiopia. What a fascinating country, and just starting to get a good understanding of some of those issues like time and status and how they differ there.
Wow. Any early insights?
Time is very, very stunning. So the Spanish I mentioned being 2 hours late. If you show up in the same day in Ethiopia, we might not even specify time. I might just say, I'll meet you this afternoon. And you would just go and wait until someone shows up.
Well, you better pick someplace good, right?
Yeah, you might be stuck there for a little while.
Don't pick the dusty bus stop, you know, go find a coffee house where you might enjoy spending some time.
Yeah, so we had the first, my background's in IO psychology, the first IO psychologist ever in Ethiopia came to train at the Institute this past year. So we were really excited to be able to give him some insights on how we work and developed a really great relationship with him. His name is Gabe. He's at the University of Gondar, and as soon as he got back, he started inquiring about getting some kind of agreement in place.
This was a question that I asked of another business expert at Florida Tech, Beth Gitlin from the Women's Business Center, and that is, should people who get into business, entrepreneurs, be thinking internationally right away? I mean, should they, is this easy? Is it hard? Is it something that, what's your advice? Well,
Beth is awesome. She'll probably give you a better answer than I will, but I guess my answer is you have to think that way, but it is harder. You know, if you want to have a successful business, what would you want to do in terms of your market? Would you want to market to 20% of the world, or do you want to market to 100% of the world? And it depends on the size of your business and what your goals are, but if you have growth goals, you have to be thinking internationally. And the fact of the matter is it's much harder to work internationally because of some of these cultural differences. So you have to put in your legwork if you really want to be, you know, the company that you can ultimately be.
Sometimes it may not be just a matter of you going and doing business someplace else, but understanding who the competition is and coming in to the United States.
Yeah, and as we were chatting about before, it's not always clear. Sometimes your competitor can be your partner in one moment, and those things get really complex when you start throwing in culture and different regulations across these different nations.
Wow. Well, it's been interesting in Melbourne here to see that we've got a Brazilian jet maker now. We have some company that I think is from France is involved in glass making for aviation. We've got all kinds of international partnerships involved in some of the aerospace that's happening right in Melbourne. And wow, I mean, a lot to understand and learn for us where there wasn't so much before.
Well, it wasn't as apparent before. If you start thinking about some of the largest companies in town are technical firms, all of their supply chain really runs through the Pacific Rim. Their design may be conducted in Italy, and so there's little pieces of their business that are all over the world. It just happens to be that they do that final assembly here, or they do their final marketing here. So we've always been working internationally, but now to a much greater degree than we ever have before.
Tell me about the summit. You've been working hard on this big event happening here in Brevard County. Fill us in.
It should be a great event. So what we're trying to do is to pull some of the thought leaders in cross-cultural management in, along with some of the people who may be experiencing challenges in this area. So the target audience for the summit are going to be academics who are doing work in culture, as well as corporate leaders, military leaders, government leaders. And our goal is to try to get them all at the same table and facilitate some discussions so that they can solve each other's problems. You know, business has their needs to move forward, and there may be people who can help give them some answers. Some of those researchers may have needs in terms of data or really understanding the context of these decisions so they could do more relevant research. And ultimately, you know, after 2 or 3 days, we'll all get together and then leave as friends and start to build some more of these networks.
So this is at the Crown Plaza Hotel. When is it?
March 6th through 8th.
And if people want to find more information about it, where can they go to do that?
They can go to iccmglobal.com and go to the Summit tab, and you'll be able to learn a little bit more about the Summit and then register if you're interested.
You brought up a minute ago military. Didn't think about that, but sure enough, here we are with people that are constantly coming and going to different theaters around the world. Wow, why does this matter to military?
Well, cultural mistakes have the opportunity to repair trust where trust might have been violated in combat. It can also lead to some confusion, or can lead to anger on the parts of folks from different regions. And we're going to be putting a lot of people in there, a lot of boots on the ground. And ultimately, we want to make sure that if we're in a peacekeeping mission, that we're able to get there. And you know, if you start violating some of these cultural norms, we've seen that they can lead to riots. So there's a lot of research in this area. There's an organization right up the road from us, DIOMI at Patrick Air Force Base, that is, has great expertise in this area. So we've partnered with them to understand how can we get our fighting force to be more cross-culturally competent. How can we assess that so that we're able to pick the right people to put them into these overseas positions? How can we develop training materials to support all that? So it's a biggest part of our business, and we're glad to do it. We want to make sure that we're helping our men and women in uniform.
I think a lot of us have seen those images from Afghanistan where frontline combat troops are sitting down in tea rooms with village elders to talk about, you know, sorry we killed your goat in that last firefight. What can we do to make amends, and how can you help us in finding the Taliban, and that kind of a thing. And boy, it really hammers home the importance of understanding, you know, the value of cultural differences.
Yeah, it's very true. So if they're able to build trust with the village elders, they're able to gain better intelligence. They're able to have better guarantees of safety as they're moving through regions. One of the big differences we saw towards the end of these conflicts was the role of women in gathering intelligence. Just like in the United States, if you want to know something in a town, who do you ask? The women. The women know what's going on in the sort of the tone of the town. But if I'm a male soldier in some of those regions, I can't talk to a woman in that way. That could lead to a real problem, real escalation of anger on the part of the folks living there. So we have to have females doing that. So we have female engagement teams. They're going in and the proper attire with their military uniforms, and they're meeting these women and learning about what's going on in the village, and then bringing that information back.
Wow, fascinating stuff. Rich Griffith, thank you so much for joining us here today, and good luck with the summit.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, that's our program. As always, we welcome your feedback on the show or anything you see in Florida Today, in print or online. Send an email to letters@floridatoday.com. I'm Matt Reed. We'll see you right here next week on WEFS and FloridaToday.com.